Hello, I am an old fart, and I have a guilty pleasure. I like knives. I am not an expert or an official representative of anything or anyone in any way. I just like knives. Today, as we take a tour through my collection of small folding pocket knives, we're going to have a look at this unit. This is a Kershaw Leek, small folding all steel pocket knife on the low end of the price spectrum. And I'm going to start with a little story about why this knife. I have had rescue dogs before, and I know a number of other people who have. And taking on a rescue dog is a commitment. A rescue dog is a dog that you agree to take out of some kind of unhealthy situation and give it a new home. They've often been abused, not always. They need help. They need a lot of work. They're never perfect. And you come to really love them because of the work and despite the lingering faults. So that's rescue dog. This is a rescue knife. This was listed as is on a swap table for a very low price. And the low price was appropriate because it was in crappy condition. New, it's only a little more expensive than the Ontario Rat 2, and this one was listed for less. Having a look at it, I thought it would be nice to have another small knife in the bargain price range. Having a look at it, it had been abused, and boy did it need help. It needed a lot of work. And it's still not perfect, but I love it because of the process, just like my rescue dog. So I bought it. I took it apart and I did a refurb and a maintenance, and that involved quite a few steps. It didn't appear to be broken, although that turned out to be incorrect, just badly cared for. So disassembled it. There are some really good YouTube videos on how to disassemble this knife. I recommend them. I believe Nick Shabazz had one of the better ones. I would recommend looking at some video advice before disassembling an assisted opening knife because there's some complicated mechanisms in there that you want to get right. It was not easy to open. The pivot screw is one-sided, but this side, which is just a bushing, is free turning. So turning the driver, that thing was turning, and it took quite a bit of work. Oh, and it was Loctited in place just for good measure. It took quite a bit of work to figure out how to get it to turn. And the trick was to put the driver in and then kind of force it at an angle so that it was forcing the bushing against the side of the body. And then I was able to eventually turn the screw out. So I got it apart. Inside, it was filthy. So thoroughly cleaned it, polished some internal surfaces that had been worn by moving back and forth on the grit that was in there, such as the washer surface, polished the assist spring, cleaned out the area where it goes, and reassembled it with grease and lubrication in all the right places. And the result was the mechanism works okay now. Then I discovered a broken piece. I was looking at the thing, and here on the clip side, there's this screw that slides in a channel. And I was thinking, what on earth is that for? Looking down inside the knife, and it didn't do anything. The screw just sat there in the channel. There was a little plastic washer on it, and it just slid, and it didn't seem to do anything that I could figure out. And I knew, well, that can't be right. So eventually figured out is that there was supposed to be a plastic angle on that thing, which you can just see here, that when you slide this channel, the plastic gets behind the blade and stops the blade from opening. So it's a safety. However, on the knife as I got it, that protrusion was not there. It had been sheared off. So when I looked at it, I incorrectly thought I was looking at a plastic washer. I now realize what almost certainly happened, which is somebody had the knife open, the safety on, and they closed the blade. So they would have encountered resistance when the blade hit the safety, and I imagine they forced it closed and sheared the thing off. That's just my guess, but that's probably what happened. So, anyway, on the Kershaw website, you can order repair parts. So I found that part, ordered it, and they sent me a new one and the screws to go with it in a couple of weeks and for no charge. So thank you. I would gladly have paid a small fee and the postage, and I appreciate that they sent me what I needed for no charge. So replaced that, and now the mechanism is pretty good. Finally, the blade was very dull, very, very dull. I guess it had been abused, or at least, and I thought at first that it had just never been sharpened. And then looking at it under a magnifier, I realized, no, it's probably been sharpened badly. I'll just pull up here. I have this magnified photo that I took of the blade. This is the original condition of the blade, and this side doesn't look too bad, it just looks dull. You can see this is quite a coarse grit on the sharpening here, but not a bad bevel. But when I turned it over and looked at the other side under the microscope, I saw two bad things. First of all, you see that here that there are two bevels. This thing has been sharpened at the wrong angle, so it's put a second bevel on one side of the blade. That can be cleaned up. And the other thing that is worse, and it really made my heart sink when I saw it, is you can see here there's corrosion on the blade. Lots of these tiny corrosion pits. Mainly on one side of the blade. I'm not sure why that would be. So I steel-wooled those pits away. I sharpened the blade on a KMA system down to 9 microns. And then I've coated the blade with frog lube wax, which you can probably see there's a bit of a waxy film on the blade, in hopes that that will adhere to the metal and maybe dissuade the corrosion from coming back. So at 9 microns on the KMA, it is not mirror sharp, but it is pretty damn sharp. It cuts paper easily. So that was the story of refurbishing this knife, and it's come back to this condition now. Quick description of the knife then. It's a combination flipper and thumb stud knife. That is, you can open it with this little flipper tab here, or you can open it with thumb studs. I prefer the thumb studs. They both work quite well. The flipper is so small. First of all, that's nice. It doesn't dig into your leg, but it's so small that there is a tendency to slip off of it. It's not a great engagement mechanism, but the thumb studs work extremely well. And it is an assisted opening knife. A speed safe is Kershaw's name for this brand. So that means that in there is a spring, which I'm pushing against until about here. And then I pass a sort of a fulcrum point, and the spring takes over and goes badoink and flicks the knife open. And then when you close the knife, you're pushing against that spring tension. So there's quite a force involved in closing the knife that's reloading the spring. Well, I'll say that it certainly works well. It really flies open. And that's kind of cool. But I must also say I don't really get the assisted opening thing. I don't really need the assistance. I've got lots of thumb stud and flipper knives that I can open just fine without the spring, and you learn to flick them very quickly without the spring. Apparently, the assisted opening like this is legal in some places that fully automatic knives are not legal. I don't really understand that. Why? How is this less dangerous or less threatening than an automatic knife? Like a casual observer wouldn't even know whether I had moved the blade or pressed a firing button. So I must say I don't really get speed safe. But it is fun to open. It flicks open very nicely. It is a frame lock knife. It locks quite securely. That's a good, 75-80% lock engagement there. Very nice. But it is not easy to initiate closing with one hand. There's essentially no room to press back on the lock bar there. You have to do the wedge inside trick. And it's slippery, so it's not easy to start the closing mechanism. It's not easy to close one-handed. The spring is very strong to close with one finger, and the body of the knife is slippery, so it's not easy to close one-handed. I'm sure there are people who can do it, but I tend to close it two-handed. The size, the blade is exactly 3 inches, which happens to be exactly the same as the Rat 2 that we looked at last video. So it would make sense to compare those. You see they are more or less the same size. In measurements, same blade length. In practical terms, the Leek seems smaller because it's so thin, so it seems to occupy less space in the pocket, and yet, strangely, at the same time, it seems to have more cutting surface on the blade, because at least for the way I use knives, This extremely rounded part of the blade on the red is not particularly useful to me. I do my cutting down here, and with the modified Wharncliffe blade on the Leek, it's essentially all cutting surface. So anyway, it is a knife in that size class. The blade I mentioned already, it is almost a Wharncliffe. They call it a Wharncliffe, but I'm pretty sure that technically to be a Wharncliffe, this cutting surface is supposed to be entirely straight, and this isn't. It's got a slight belly just towards the end. Oh well. Very pointy, scary looking pointy. Very thin, so it's certainly a slicey blade. The steel is 14C28N, which is a long serial number, which is a good budget steel. It's sort of in the same league as AUS8, again making it similar to the Rat 2. Now, 14C28 is high chromium, and they say that that gives it good corrosion resistance, but think back to that photo I showed you, and this blade was corroded. Now, I think it had been abused, and I hope that cared for well, corrosion isn't going to be a problem. And I found it quite easy to sharpen. It's not super tough steel, so it sharpened well. The body is all steel, stainless steel, very slim, very thin, very nice. It seems compact. I like the look of the polished steel scales, but I must say that they are slippery. I already mentioned that makes it hard to close, for example, because when I go to put pressure on the blade, it's slipping through my hands. So I know you can't have it both ways. I like the glossy look of the body, and I'm complaining that it's slippery. So anyway, it is what it is. The weight, it is an all-steel knife, so it's quite heavy for its size. Most of the weight is in the handle, so you see the balance point is way back here, which means that when you're holding it, the blade itself seems very light. I'll talk about the clip. First of all, there are no mounting options for the clip. Well, actually there are. There are no side options for the clip. You can go here, go on this end, so you can go tip up, tip down, but only right side carry. There's no mounting holes for left side carry. And it is a very shallow carry clip. There's the insertion point, and because of the weird body shape, all of this sticks out of your pocket when you're carrying it, which I don't really care for. The clip is also very long. I mean, look, it's practically the whole length of the body. Now that means that it holds well, which is good, but interestingly, it also, I think it's a design feature, is that it acts as a finger groove. See, when I'm holding the knife, this curve of the clip is where my index finger goes, so it actually becomes part of holding the knife, and it's actually quite comfortable. I rather like that. So speaking of what I like, what else do I like? First, I think I should mention, I really like Nick Shabazz's knife review videos. I think he's extremely knowledgeable, and he's hilarious to listen to. And he's done a review of the Leek that you should go and watch. Just search Shabazz and Leek. The full title is something like The Full Mostly Accurate Nick Shabazz Leek Review, or something like that. It's really a lot of fun. And he really doesn't like this knife. So I rarely disagree with Nick. He's way more qualified and respected than me, but I disagree on this. I like this knife. In a minute, I'm going to list all the things I don't like about it. I think I like it because it's a rescue dog, and I'm glad to have rescued it. Now, what else? I like the sleek appearance. I like the fact that the presentation side is quite clean. There's no markings at all except for a subtle engraved Kershaw logo. I like the mechanism. It's fun to open. I like having the safety because the assist is so aggressive that it's nice to have that feature to know that it's not going to fire in my pocket. I sometimes forget it's on, which is annoying, but you can't have it both ways. It's comfortable to hold. That trick with the pocket clip is quite neat, so it is actually a pleasant knife to hold and cut with. And it is, again, look at that blade, it is very slicey and cutty and pokey. What don't I like? Well, a few things. First of all, I don't really like the blade. I don't like the Wharncliffe blade style. I prefer a drop point. I find, and we'll come back to this in a moment, but I think it's scary looking. It really looks like a blade that was designed to stab things. and there's essentially no usable belly curve, so you're cutting with a flat, straight surface. There is no sharpening choil, so anytime you're sharpening, you're threatening the shoulder of the blade. It's going to be difficult to resharpen it multiple times without eroding that shoulder. And it is made from a budget steel, and we already mentioned that problem with corrosion, which wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. The mechanism, I mentioned it is fun to open. Well, it's not fun to close, and I usually end up closing it two hands. And it has that, what I would call a design flaw, that allowed the previous owner to shear the safety off by closing it with the safety engaged. So I think it needed to have another way to achieve that. The body is slippery. And again, I know you can't have it both ways. I like the look of the slipperiness. I just don't like the slipperiness of the slipperiness. And the extremely shallow carry clip with this weird hump sticking out of your pocket is a little ugly. So those are some things I don't like. Now, what about my internationally unknown, not in any way famous knife rating systems? Let's go through those. First, the NTGK rating, which is, of course, non-threatening gentleman's knife. How does it do? Well, for non-threatening, not well. I'd give it a C for non-threatening. It's got a scary, pointy shape. It looks like it was designed for stabbing. And with the assisted open mechanism, it flies open fast and loud. And it's pretty hard to convince a nervous person that that's not a switchblade. In theory, you could open it slowly, but it's not easy to do. It's two-handed, but it's not easy to do. It's not easy to get your hands on that. And the spring really wants to take it away from you. So it pretty much has to be opened in a scary way. I'd give it a C. It's non-threatening. As a gentleman's knife, meh. It rides high in your pocket, sticks out, looks weird in my suit pants. Looks weapony, not gentlemanly. On the other hand, it's a nice size and it's sleek. Give it a B for gentleman's knife. So a B and a C. I'm going to give it a B overall as a non-threatening gentleman's knife. My other internationally unknown rating, of course, is the KN rating, which is what will my knife nerd friends think about this knife. Again, I'm going to give it a B. It's plain steel, budget steel, not exotic. God forbid my knife nerd friends should see those corrosion pits. There are few clip options. It's okay, but I don't think it's a knife my knife nerd friends are going to wow over. And finally, my CMR rating, which is my cut myself rating. On that, it'll score an A. Surprisingly, considering the extreme pointiness, I have never cut myself on this knife, so somehow it manages to be relatively safe from my stupidity. So in summary, first of all, this knife was a good lesson in the value of doing preventative maintenance and keeping a knife healthy. And it was a good lesson that a little bit of maintenance can save a rescue knife and turn it into a decent tool. It's compact, it's sleek, it's a budget-priced knife that works pretty well. I'd say it's a pretty good everyday carry knife as a user, but it's too scary looking for office environments. So this is a blue jeans user, not a suit user. So anyway, sorry, Nick. I like it. And it comes out and comes along with me every now and then. Thanks very much for watching. See you again next time. Bye-bye.